Thank you. So we're in session. Okay. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Needham Historical Commission on March 10th, 2025 at 7 p.m. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, still in force until the end of this month. Meetings of public bodies may be conducted virtually, provided that adequate access is provided to the public. This meeting is held in accordance with those acts. Audience members and attendees are advised that this meeting is being recorded. All votes will be taken by roll call. Okay, so we're in session. Leah has agreed to take notes in Megan's absence. And first thing is the minutes of the February 10th meeting. Do we have a chance to read them? Did they have any changes? Did I?
I don't think I saw one. I don't remember
Did I not
seeing one either.
I was going back and forth with Megan about some things to edit, and maybe I just ended up not said. Okay, we will do this. We will postpone the February meeting, the February minutes till the April.
I was just.
They were good too.
I
would
sure
love
they're
them.
great.
Real pot boiler. Okay, we'll do this. Do this in April. 4 pages long. Her hand must have been very cramped by the end of this. Okay. So we did circulate the changes to the public meeting requirements. The flexibilities to the open meeting law that were provided by the state in response to COVID are set to expire by the end of this month. And as of yet, there are no changes. So if there are no changes by March 31st, then all public meetings must have an in-person option. So we can no longer meet solely on Zoom. We have to meet in person, or at least some number of us have to meet in person. Board and committee members can only participate remotely if approved by their board or committee chair. I'm pretty nice about that. And public meetings can no longer be entirely remote. So we do have to meet in person. There will still be a remote option for the public. But in any, every effort should be made to meet live the way we used to do in the before time. Yeah. Update on the meeting with Joe Prondak, building commissioner, because we will have at least 4 people attending. Jeff, did you want to come?
He's muted.
You're muted.
Boomba.
We can't hear you. You're muted.
Letting me catch up on my notes. Okay. Well,
Yes, I'm unmuted and I plan on attending.
Excuse me?
Plan on.
Yeah, okay, that's what I figured you did. Okay,
Are
so
we-
that would be, huh?
We're meeting, so we're not meeting at Joe's office area?
No, that's what I'm getting to. So, yeah, so we'll have 5 people. That will make it a public meeting. So it will be posted as a public meeting, and because it is a public meeting, it has to be held in a place that is both accessible to any public who choose to attend, and also has to have a remote option. So the meeting has been moved to the select board room. So same time, March 18th at 10 a.m., but in the select board room rather than the public services building. Okay?
Okay,
Got it? So we'll see you guys there next week.
Now that it's being held in a hybrid fashion, may I listen in remotely? I can't
Yes,
be
of
here in
course.
person, but I could attend remotely potentially.
Okay. Yeah, the agenda will have the Zoom link.
Thank you.
And we'll circulate that.
Will be the last meeting, you'll be able to fully do so without the permission of the chair.
I was getting my permission. Yes.
But she wants the link, so she has to be nice. What's it worth to you? Okay, and actually just get this over with too. I will not be at the April 7th meeting in person. I will be here on Zoom because that will be 1 week out for the knee surgery. So Leah has agreed to take the chair for the meeting. We'll be meeting over there as usual. So that's the only change, and I'll circulate an agenda and all that stuff in advance, but Leah will be the chair. And you said we don't need to vote on that, right? It's just, okay, so that's done. Okay, so topic for today, and this is gonna be something we discuss over a long period of time. Obviously, this is not something that's going to town meeting in May, especially because they're about to close the warrant. We have no proposal yet. It would be nice if we had it for next May town meeting, but I don't, but we'll see how that goes. But the question is, or the issue is, I'd like to begin discussion of the demolition delay bylaw. And, I don't know if you guys still have this, so I'll send it around.
Thanks.
This is the bylaw comparison document
right.
that I sent you,
Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Mark.
Got this pulled up. Send it to you.
Oh, great, thank you. Okay. First question, the most basic question is, do we want to amend the bylaw? Oh,
I think we do, but, I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like it's not been terribly effective.
Yeah.
6 months seems like a short time frame compared to others, I guess, in the communities nearby. So I would say yes. I mean, I don't know if anyone else has an opinion.
I thought when we talked with, I forget what her name was,
Jen.
from the MHC,
Jen,
it sounded like we were feeling like we should just mirror the MHC.
our structure is an outlier. It may be,
Right.
it may be unique. The way we do it, and not the way that the MHC recommends.
Given that, doesn't it make sense to change it to,
Yeah, I mean, no,
Comply
we're not bound by their best practices, so, there are certainly advantages.
that's what I took away from that meeting.
Yeah.
Good idea.
You would have made your lives easier if you just said no,
Understood.
but you didn't. So now, now we embark on a longer road. I agree. I think it has been ineffective. It is very labor intensive. I don't know yet that the other process will be any less labor
Right.
intensive. That's one of the things we'll be looking into. But it really has not been an effective bylaw. It is not. Honestly, the MHC doesn't believe that demolition delays are an effective solution in general. Because, they're basically, if somebody wants to preserve the house, they will preserve the house. If they don't want to preserve the house, there's very little you can do that will persuade them otherwise. But it's still important to have it in place as an acknowledgement of historical importance of the properties and to allow the possibility of negotiating some kind of other settlement short of demolition.
And I imagine 6 months, builders could wait it out.
What do they do?
A year maybe makes it a lot more difficult.
6 months, you're actually pretty much within the permit timeline
Right,
anyway,
yeah.
so it almost doesn't, it doesn't delay anything. I mean, obviously, the idea is not to punish developers or make their lives difficult. The idea is to have some time to try and find an alternative that's, either, a partial renovation, or sometimes you can move the structure, or find some, some possibility that doesn't necessarily mean complete demolition of the property. But if you're sort of still within the permit timeline, it doesn't really provide much of an opportunity for that, so. So a longer timeline would definitely be to greater advantage. Okay, so the reason I sent this around, actually, I sent a couple of documents around. One was just some random notes. Well, one was just the short version of the discussion with Jen, which is good because the long version is in the minutes, which you don't have. So the notes for demolition delay bylaw are my summary notes of our discussion with Jen. This article, Mass City ranks as best place to live, which talks about sort of like why people like preservation, or how they're talking about best cities, and within that they talk a lot of the people who talk about why they like the city talk about preservation, so I just wanted that sort of on the radar screen, and then a couple of things that I appended over the years as notes. Hope McDermott, a Realtor, who does a lot of high-end listing in Needham's, actually features historic preservation as one of the features of living in Needham, or historic homes is one of the features of living in Needham. And I had another note about retrofitting old houses, which are actually surprisingly energy efficient. And then this longer article, Why Do Old Places Matter, which I'm sorry, I should have mentioned, you really didn't need to read the whole thing. Read it eventually, it's actually very interesting, but no,
There was actually I skimmed through it, there was actually a one page.
that's what I meant to
summary.
say, is look at that chapter that has the summary, and then you can sort of go to some of the expanded notes afterward or something, but yeah, not all 64 pages, not right away anyway. But, you know, as we go through this process, there are a couple of things we're gonna need to think about. And one is why. First question we're gonna be asked is, why do you wanna change it? The second question we're gonna be asked is, okay, fine, what do you wanna do? And we're gonna have to really come up with sort of a real plan, not we want it longer, or we think age is better. We really need to have a path, you know, a defined structure, a defined outline of what it is we're trying to move toward, because it is going to involve ultimately a bylaw change if we did do this successfully. So that would mean discussions with the select board, discussions with the town council, discussions with the planning board, and probably even discussions with the building department. So, and every time we get there, the first question is gonna be why and what. So we really have to nail down why and what before we do anything else. And these articles are sort of the background. You know, why is it important to do this? Why do we want to do this? What is the public benefit of doing this? So they're not, so they're really gonna kind of inform our, you know, our decisions as we go forward and as we structure our arguments.
And did you mention that one of the meetings, I think when we talked about this briefly, there was some research done on other communities? There's materials that,
There was, and I was not able to lay my hands on them, which worries me a little bit, so I'm gonna have to.
because that would be another, you
Go to
know,
Laura and ask Laura to send me copies, because she and Don Lankowitz and Rick Hardy did a lot of research around the surrounding towns about what kinds of bylaws they have, and they also did some interviews about, yeah, how well they work and that kind of
and
thing.
that may affect how you present, you know,
Yeah.
why we're doing this because.
Right,
Yeah.
Adjoining communities are much more effective in implementing this type of a bylaw.
and they might
because of
have
this.
articulated it. right.
Exactly, if we can address their experience, you know, they've tried this, or this is how they do it, and they've found, you know, that this has worked for this, you know, why this has worked.
And or
How
maybe
does
there's
this
a
work?
link to higher property values and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of the general theory, and this, what this has come up in some of the things I sent you, is that people like stability, and in a town like Needham, where houses are being torn down constantly, you move into a neighborhood that has a bunch of cozy little, you know, capes, and suddenly they're just coming down, and, you know, construction all over the place. It actually can be an advantage in selling a house if you can demonstrate that houses around it are not going anywhere. You're not entering construction zone. You're not, you know, you're not playing roulette with your property values. The space, you know, the sort of mass space around you, you know, is gonna stay, you know, more or less consistent. It's not suddenly gonna become constrained by a giant house next door.
And
That
not
kind of
dwarfed.
thing. Yeah, you know, you lose your backyard sunlight, and, you know, the house next door is 12 feet from your fence and 2 feet from the street, it feels like, and, you know, you know, so there is some, real estate value to that kind of stability. Okay, so if we make the change, what are our goals? This isn't a quiz, we're just brainstorming at this point. There are no right and wrong answers. You know, I looking at the sort of the pros and cons, some things are much better. I mean, I like the clarity of the age-based bylaw. I worry about the workload, the review process workload.
So simplicity, clarification.
Yeah, I mean, then everybody, you know, it's easy for the building department, it's easy for the realtors. They're not constantly having to call up or check a list or see, you know, why this house, why not that house. You know, they'll just know what year it was built and that's that. But it does, you know, realistically, we're not going to have a consultant on retainer. You know, and that's very nice to have somebody and just call them up and say, okay, here's the address, go for it. But that's not, I don't think that's a realistic possibility for us, unless we can do it in under $1,050 a year. Which maybe we can.
I mean, can we assign one of us on the committee to do it?
That might be an option, that we just farm them out.
But it's like, you know, it'll be my turn in 2025, it'll be Leah's turn in 2026.
Yeah, or we can
Or
just.
rotate.
Or
just
like,
rotate through
yeah,
or something,
right,
yeah. Yeah, so that's a possibility. One of the questions I'll have for Joe, and I'll ask him this in advance, so we can look it up, is how many houses of 100 years or older, you know, how many applications for demolition for houses of that age do they get every year? You know, we haven't seen an inventory house in 2 years.
What does that mean?
A house on the historic inventory, the ones that right now, the ones that have to come to us for review. But, you know, there are not that many houses on the inventory.
Yeah, and we're staying
So-
in them because we can't afford to move.
That's right. Sorry, mine's on the inventory, now yours is on the inventory.
I think I'm the only one in the committee who isn't.
Yours is on the inventory, Jeff's on the
Historic house.
inventory.
Yeah. You don't live in a historic house.
40, built in the 40s, so it's not.
Close.
Tick, tick, tick,
It's not-
15
Yeah.
15 years, and
Yeah.
it'll be on in our sites.
You know, it's nothing special about it.
Well,
It's
that's,
your typical.
That's not gonna matter soon.
Mhm.
No, I mean, it will be reviewed if it's within the
Yeah,
year.
that's the
but,
thing,
you know,
is, yeah.
It's not necessarily gonna rise to the level of significant historic preservation requirement.
so what, so we have the what, we have the why, we
Simplicity.
have the what.
Okay,
Yeah, so what are our goals?
so yeah, simplicity,
Simplicity,
clarification, or clarity, rather.
simplicity and clarity.
Yeah.
Effectiveness,
Well, how do you define that? Let's be more clear.
it actually preserves houses.
Okay, so, yeah. And so
Okay.
like something about meeting our mission, I mean, it's sort of addressing our mission, which is to preserve the integrity of the historical houses here in Needham.
Our mission, historic preservation. We would like to educate the public on the importance of the historic landscape.
So can we speak to some of these
Yeah, absolutely.
things? Like, for example, less labor intensive. Process is clear, information readily accessible. Automatic criteria. And some of that might be pulled into the sort of a subtext of the simplicity and clarity.
Yeah,
I think too, it goes with the educating the public piece, but also, I know I say this all the time, but the sustainability side of things, it is better for the community and for the
Mhm.
environment to use a house that is already there
Mhm,
than to knock it down building.
mhm.
especially because an older house is I mean, obviously, things have been added to it over the years. It will have insulation and they have asbestos, but overall, it's an organic structure. It started life as an organic structure.
embodied carbon and all of that stuff. It's just better to use.
And can we, I mean, do we have the right to say anything about property values or the, or
can-
aesthetics? Or
We can say whatever we want. We're not, you know,
I feel like that.
Yeah,
that
whatever we
needs to play
think.
into it, like we need to speak either to aesthetics and or money, something that people can get excited about. Somebody will get excited about that. I mean,
I think, and authenticity
oh, yeah.
is, I mean, there is a difference between the real thing and the not real thing. I mean, you know, people are always very excited to see the Mona Lisa in person, even though they could get a much better view of any number of excellent facsimiles and photographs. It's not the same. And that's essentially, you know, it's essentially true also of the built environment. This is in this place, the town has been operating since, you know, 390 years. You know, hasn't been incorporated as long as that, but it has been occupied as long as that. Historic town, you know, should have some historic authenticity,
Mhm.
and that is disappearing rapidly.
We should work to preserve that, so
Yeah.
maybe something to that effect. Preservation of our historic identity and authenticity.
Would we want to structure our bylaw to say, using the MHC bylaw? Principle of, is there any reason to reinvent the wheel? Obviously, we'll tweak it a little bit, but it's basic.
I think it's fine. to do
Its basic structure is to designate every you know, essentially choose the age, I think. 50, which is their standard, is probably going to be much harder to sell than 100. I'm also not sure that 50 is really necessary at
That's
this
not really
point.
historic.
No, I mean, there's still going to be,
1970,
there's still gonna be houses that we might want to add by permission that are not necessarily 100 years old. But I think those will be few and far between. You know, something in particular happens. But to be honest, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
I mean, in my mind, historic.
I mean, I think of
You
some
had
from the
older than
20s, but
100.
that's already 100 years, so.
Yeah, I mean, I would think even
Yeah.
more than 100 would be historic.
Yeah, anything
Like-
100 and older, yeah.
But in
But-
my mind, like, if I were to set it, it would probably be 125 or 150 years. Because then there's no argument at all.
True, but you're also starting to, there's a big stock of housing in the 1880 range.
Yeah, that would still
So-
match, wouldn't it?
Last for 100 and settled for 125.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the exact number is, you know, not something first of all, we need to find out how many houses over 100 years old there are. Need to get a list from the assessor, just and so get that information, get the information from the building commissioner about how many houses of that age are demolished every year, to see sort of what the scope of the issue is. But I think, yeah, I think, you know, barring some local tweaks, the model bylaw is probably the best considered and the simplest way of managing the transition. That does change the way, I mean, obviously it changes the way we operate. Oddly enough, the historic demolition, the historic commission bylaw only talks about demolition. It doesn't actually talk about how houses are acquired on the inventory. So that's going to be another topic for discussion. I don't know to what extent we actually have, yeah, I don't know how much of the bylaw is gonna have to change. The second issue, once we decide sort of what we want, is whether anything within the demolition process other than the timeline is going to have to
The
change.
model bylaw doesn't reference historic inventory of houses, right? It's just the age and then,
Well, that becomes the inventory, then instead of
And then-
the selection and review process and then voting it and then talking to the owners and,
Yeah.
that we go through now. Basically, any house that meets the age criterion is on the town's historic inventory.
right. And then it goes through another level of review before it's determined to be significant or whatever to be.
No, that just,
I
that
thought there
just,
was, not the current our bylaw, but the model bylaw.
no, I don't think
Thought it
so, but I think that, but then the
was a
problem is,
category of,
but then there's, this is also a question for the MHC, and I hope Jen's successor is as knowledgeable as she is. There's a state level listing. And very
thought there
often,
was-
if you want to, if you want any state funding for preservation, you have to demonstrate that the house is on the state level, on the state listing. Now, we go through that fairly automatically once we load something onto the inventory, the B forms get made, they get sent up the line.
Are you talking about it becoming, a house becoming from Needham Historical to Mass Historical? So that's not automatic, that needs to be, each house needs to apply.
I don't know. We sort of have it as part of the process now. But,
So like my house, for example, is over 200 years old,
yeah,
so you would think it would be on Mass.
it is, it is.
Oh, I don't have the cute sign. It is?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Since in Macris, if it's in Macris, it counts.
If it's in what?
Macris, the
Oh.
state database,
Ah,
the
okay.
Mass Historical Commission's database.
Oh, so it is automatic, huh?
Yeah, well, because
By
our process involves creating the B forms and working through the MHC.
The B form is what you're missing. here.
Yeah, for your house, you're missing, well, we know it exists, so. it's-
Yeah.
Or once existed.
Okay.
But, if we had this sort of automatic process, how a house gets documented, and especially how a house goes up the line to state listing, will probably be different. And I think that's part of why, as Jen said, some towns keep a consultant on retainer to just sort of go through this process each time. I don't see us doing that unless it turns out that we're really talking about a very small number. But certainly the first couple of years, I think it's gonna be a fairly big number, because we have to scoop a bunch of them, that weren't on the inventory, and then each year we'll be able to pace it, figure out how many come on each year and figure it out, but, for example, we asked for state funds, Mass Cultural Council funds, to help with, we had to both roof and paint the house. Usually we stage them out so we can afford it, but we had some significant damage to the roof and to the facade, so we had to both roof and paint in the same year, which, busted our contingency funds. So we applied to the Cultural Facilities Fund, which is the Mass Cultural Council's funds for renovating, maintaining historic buildings. First question they ask is it on the state database? And you have to actually provide, it's called PNF? Some form that basically you get the Historical Commission's permission to make changes to the building, that you can demonstrate that you're not harming the building, you're actually, helping.
And can they give you money to support that?
They will, I mean, if they approve the grant. but there's no even starting the process until you can demonstrate that you're on the state inventory. So, so obviously shoveling a bunch of new houses onto the inventory just by virtue of their being older now, which is what's gonna happen for that first year especially. We have to figure out what the process is. That's the next step, is what's the process? Once we decide what we wanna do, how do we do it, how do we get there? But the process is to get these houses to the state inventory, to get the B forms, or maybe we pick and choose which ones are really the most likely to need documentation, versus the ones, like Marshall's house that won't.
It won't make it.
That won't be. So do we trim the list? Do we cover the whole list? Do we fight a grant and try and do the whole thing at once? I mean, there's that aspect of it too, as we get down the line.
I mean, with the draft, the historical commission, the state historical commission draft, what I meant by double level, there's first, anything over 50 in this case, but 100 years
Yeah.
or older, is considered a significant building by
Yeah.
that definition. But significant is defined as importantly associated with one or more historic persons or events, or with the broad architectural, cultural, political, economic, or social history of the town or Commonwealth, or is historically or architecturally important in terms of period, style, method, blah, blah, blah. The commission first decides if it should be considered significant or not. If it's considered significant, then if they decide it's not significant under those categories, then the permit can go ahead. I mean, the demolition can go
Yeah, but
ahead.
that has to be reviewed at
But-
the time of the request.
Right,
Yeah,
but then if it's determined to be significant, then you have to have a public
right.
hearing to determine if it should be preserved.
Yeah, which is how
So
our
it's-
process is based on that. It just cuts out all the stuff about age-based.
Right, but I mean,
Yeah,
it does have kind of a double level. I mean, you can eliminate probably a lot of houses in a certain age category. If it's,
yeah,
if it were the 40s, I mean, you may decide they're all, not architecturally significant or not culturally or politically or,
yeah.
well, I'm just saying.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
I think-
but that's the thing, is you still need to look at each one. Yeah, so the assumption, rather than going through the process of putting it on the inventory the way we do now, and then going through
Right.
that process of it,
you
that's
cut that.
essentially the first meeting of our 3 in this process, is to determine whether the house is significant.
Right,
Well, and I think something that was interesting to me that Jen brought up that I think made me feel better, because talking about just being inundated potentially with a whole bunch of properties all at once, if we do go age-based, is that you can do that determining of significance with there was this term,
Designee or
yeah,
something like that.
designee, so that's another thing, we can
Deputy or-
take turns of whoever's turn it is for a quarter or whatever, so that we don't have to be using meetings and having, because there's a very tight turnaround for determining that, right, Gloria?
There is,
Yeah.
there is, and
I think it was
that's,
like 15 days. or something.
the building department has, the current timeline, the building department has 5 days to forward to us the demolition request. We have 21 days to schedule that first hearing about the significance, 45 days to hold a public meeting to determine whether or not whether or not we're gonna oppose the delay. And the reason that timeline is longer is because there's a several week notification, public publication process. Abutters have to be notified by mail. So there is a sort of built-in delay for that, but I don't think it's happened more than once that I can remember, but that may mean that we have an emergency meeting in the summer. normally that falls, it almost always falls within the timing of our next meeting, if we get something, unless it absolutely, unless we got one today, we would have to meet in 3 weeks rather than 4 weeks. But normally they just fall within the meeting structure. But in the summer, obviously they wouldn't, because we'd be off for a couple months. But yeah, I think, the first step obviously is to figure out sort of what kind of numbers we're talking about. Because it may be daunting and it may be trivial. But then we do need to figure out a way to manage the numbers, either by designating, splitting them up. Or seeking grant funding for a consultant. We'll hire Jen. That's what she's doing now. And given how hard it was for us to find one. So that would be sort of the next part of the process, but what I'd like to right now just really focus on is, we've decided we do want to do this. So what is it we actually want to ask for, and what are our goals? And our goals are going to be presumably an age-based demolition delay bylaw. Based on the MHC model bylaw. Appropriate tweaks.
I'd love to see what Dedham and Wellesley do.
Yep, that's gonna be part of this process. Now Jen suggested Winchester and Medfield. As age-based, they're towns she's worked with that both have age-based bylaws. I don't know what Dedham does. I think one of the things we do need to do is find that file of information that Laura had. Because they did talk to some of the surrounding towns, but I'm sure at this point it needs some updating as well. And if we can't find it, we will make a list of the towns we want to talk to and then farm it out, and we'll just call a historical commissioner for each town and we'll have a sort of set.
I mean,
Essentially make a spreadsheet, we'll have a set question.
we're surrounded by 6 towns, so let's ask them all.
Yeah, I think they did that. If we've got that information, it'd be nice to not to replicate it, but if I cannot, I had a whole sheet of this. I'm wondering, maybe it's in the old print days. I should look in my files. I'm so
Have somebody else.
conditioned now to, nobody can find things in my files.
Oh.
Believe me.
Delegate.
Yeah, I'm so conditioned to think everything's on my laptop that when I can't find something, I forget it might exist in other forms.
And for what it's worth, I will say that I think it was before my time, because there was a reference of this research being done, but I haven't seen
It
it,
could be
so
a
if
good,
that
it
helps
could be a good
you.
10 years old, in which case we probably want to update it anyway.
I think the commission's very long, but in this room. Might help.
Yeah, no, it was, I was gonna say, 3 of the members who on that, worked on that passed away.
Oh,
Oh, my.
Well, only one of them was untimely. All 3 were unfortunate, but only one was untimely. Okay, so those are the topic, that's basically what I wanted to address today. And then I think next time we will start outlining the actual steps, the action steps that we need to start taking. But in the meantime, I will gather some of the numbers so we can make informed tactics rather than, sort of theoretical, what we might want to do if we knew what we knew. But that's going to, yeah, it's going to, we're gonna start with, gathering the numbers of how many houses are we even talking about. Talking to neighboring towns to see what it is they're doing and how effective they feel it's been. And starting to form. Starting to put that information into this model bylaw framework and start seeing how it's gonna start to fit and whether it's going to, whether some of the things we're looking at, the towns that are around us are doing are going to meet the goals that we're trying to meet. Does anybody else have anything to add to that, or any other discussion, or any other topics?
Is there any dovetailing with the building commissioner? What, do we have an agenda that we want to talk about?
We have, actually, I will send that around before next week. We did have a series of questions we wanted to talk to him about. They
But
should be in the
unrelated to
minutes.
this?
Unrelated to this, there were more about, well, I mean, unrelated to changing the bylaw.
Okay.
They were related to the current implementation of the bylaw,
Okay.
to some extent. They should be in the minutes, but I'll pull them out and send them around, so we sort of have them to hand. We could talk about the kinds of things we want to discuss with them. Though it's not a script, if you've got other
Is there
questions.
anything that you want us to do to prep for that meeting?
Yes, I mean, look at the questions that, that we sort of outlined when we did talk about meeting with him, which was a couple months ago. And then, think about if there's anything else I want this to be a amicable conversation. I think there's some things that, I know the topic of the, house on Central Avenue that was completely, refurbished, refacaded, came up. But I don't want it to be a sort of grievance session about that, because we have, he's a nice guy, we have, we're gonna have an ongoing relationship with him, so we want we want to express concerns and we want to understand where he's coming from, but we don't, but since we have yet, this is really the first time we're meeting him, so it's not.
Is he responsible for like aesthetics review, design review?
No. No, design review, there's really no aesthetics review
There
for.
There should be. I mean, isn't that why
If we
we're all
were
here?
kids, yes, well,
Isn't that why we're
but the
here?
bylaw doesn't cover that, it does, I mean, it doesn't, we have no authority over something like that, and this is, after all, people's private property. And that's always, that's always the conflict
that down.
is. You're in a public meeting.
Sorry.
The conflict is always, how do you function as an individual? And how do you function in the community, and to some extent, I think a very large extent, possession of an historic house in a historic community is really at that pivot point in the way that a lot of people's, real estate decisions are not. Something I think people should understand better when they buy a historic house. Some people very much do, and some people very much don't. But, you can't tell people what to do with their house. If they're in a historic district, you can tell them a few things, but not, by and large, you can't tell people how to manage their house or what to do with their house, short of demolition. But apart from the demolition the demolition review provision in the bylaw, we are also tasked with providing historic preservation information. And what we have done, I think, quite successfully with the previous building commissioner, who was on his own historical commission, in his own town, And sort of knew the, you know, knew what was motivating us. If somebody had a historic house that they wanted to do renovation, even if it was not a demolition and they did not fall under the bylaw, you know, technically, he would still say, talk to the historical commission, you know, show them what it is you're planning to do, see what advice, you know, they might want to give you. And we found for the most part that homeowners really wanted to maintain the sort of the historic structure of their house. Beth Klaczewski, your previous owner, was a good example. That house with that red house on Warren Street before, or on High Rock Street before it converges with South. Where they did I'm not sure any of you were where they did that big garage addition? It was a 1860s house, maybe. It was on the older side. And it had a little garage and they wanted to build an addition. And, you know, we just talked to them about, you know, if, you know, this is the plan. The plan was pretty good. The architect was actually quite sensitive about historic structures, but, you know, can you use a window that mirrors the windows on the old house rather than the ones you had planned? And could you do, and you know, it turned out to be a pretty seamless, you know, it's large in a way that an older house wouldn't have a large second story, sort of big garage. It's a garage with like bedrooms and playroom. It was a garage with a second story. It was already like a 3-car garage. But then had a second story that they were using as an apartment playroom. So it had, you know, it was a sizable structure. But you don't look at it and say, oh my God, modern addition, you know, it looks good with the house. And, you know, we're not gonna tell them they can't do their addition because we can't tell them that. But we can help them, especially if they are, you know, enamored of their historic house. We can help them, you know, maybe maintain its historic character a little bit better. And we'd like to have that relationship with the new building commissioner,
We're gonna
because,
bring that type of thing up with.
yeah, that we would just like the opportunity to discuss, you know, when these things come up, we would like the opportunity, or at least like him to recommend to the builders and homeowners that they come by and talk to us. You know, we're not gonna force them, we can't force them into anything, but we do have this consultation rule in our committee definition in the bylaw, so we're not muzzled, you know, for anything but just demolition. We do this also for the town, you know, it's, as you and I know, we sit on, you know, sit on various committees for, you know, preservation or renovation of historic structures, the Emery River and, you know, some of the downtown, the common and spaces like that. You know, we usually have you know, we're usually in the room to help inform those discussions. So that is part of our job as well. And just, I think, something we would like to emphasize a little bit and encourage. So I will send those questions around, but feel free to add your own.
Speaking of storage, this is not on that topic, but historic preservation, did you happen to see the article in the Globe about that house in Natick?
Natick, yes.
The oldest house in Natick, it was torn down by the Mass Audubon Society.
What?
Found that incredibly.
Well, yeah,
How counterintuitive.
Yeah, really.
well, but you know, it was, I suspect, I mean, I assume that means it was on the Broad Meadow property someplace. Broadmoor property someplace.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not their mission, it's not their expertise, and I'm sure it just sat there until somebody said,
Well,
you
it's
know,
okay.
it's gonna fall down and we're gonna be liable.
And it was a number of years, this went through a whole process, but it did also mention the article of their bylaw. It was gonna be demolished under a 6-month
Hmm.
bylaw, so theirs
Yeah.
might be 6 months.
And I suspect there's 6 months too, yeah.
But that was, it was sad, just to read that article, the oldest house in Natick, just gone.
Yeah, 1690 something.
Oh, boy.
And it actually was,
Yeah,
Solid?
1696.
yeah, the Solid property had
Solid,
a
yeah.
sort of. It
Was it privately owned, you said, or was part of the Mass Audubon?
I think it was, it must have been on the property because they were responsible
Got it,
for it, they
okay.
owned it.
Oh.
But I
That-
remember
That part kind of shocked me. too.
talking about, yeah, talking about that in the context of
They
the
like
Baker
animals, not
estate.
buildings.
But I can't remember what the relationship was. There was one time I didn't Baker Tomlinson, we started talking about and asking, so it did have some public. It had some public existence, existence as a public space for a while as well, where the property did. Okay, is there anything else anybody wants to bring up or discuss? Clear on what we've done so far? So we keep a running series of notes so we can see who's gone.
Hey, Gloria,
Hi,
I have
Jeff.
I have one question.
Yeah,
If we went to like 100-year, thing for, I guess qualification for would it be an inventory anymore? But would we have to have fill out B forms for every house that's 100 years old or more?
well, that's what we're not sure of. That was part of the discussion with Jen. And she said, she didn't have, I mean, there was no conclusion. Ideally, yes, but practically probably not. And couple of her suggestions were, farm them out. So you could spread the load a little between the commissioners. She also said that some towns kept a consultant on retainer. Said I don't see that happening for us, but,
Right, I
yeah,
heard that.
so, or maybe we just are very selective about which ones we get done. If there are things that are really valuable properties, we need to get onto the state inventory, and then some that we could wait longer on. So, it would help a lot if the registry of deeds got all their records digitized. It's actually searchable. They're working on it. Yeah, so yeah, that will be an issue that will have to be resolved as well. That's when we know probably how many properties we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we good? You all set, Jeff?
Yep.
Okay, we'll see you next week then at the meeting. Okay, so do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, roll call. Jeff?
Aye.
Zohar? Leah?
Hi.
Marshall?
Yeah, aye.
Chair votes yes. 5-0 with 2 absences. All right,